Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this Place and Resources Overview and Scrutiny Committee. It's a special meeting with the one item on the agenda to consider the call-in on the Cabinet decision on waste services. Item number one, apologies for absence.
Through you, Chair, we've had apologies for absence from Councillor Silas Hayes, with Councillor Scott Packer substituting for him.
Thank you. Any declarations of interest from members? There's one from me, as I was a member of the working group that was advising Cabinet prior to the decision. I think that would also go for you, Ron. Oh, he's putting in his hearing aid. Apologies. Sorry. So declarations of interest, you were on the working group, the waste working group as well. Yes. Do you wish to make that? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Just for the record, I'm not due to speak, but I was on that panel as well.
That's okay. As long as you're sitting there, it doesn't matter. Any other declarations of interest? Right, so Chair's announcements. Firstly, we've had a number of changes to the committee, and can I first start with thanking Councillor Kamala Gilieva, Jeffrey Johnson and Peter York, who've left the committee as of the last AGM, and thank them for their service and contribution to the committee. And can I welcome Ron Furman, Sue Gaskell and Deborah King to this committee. I think this is your first one, and thank you, particularly as you've had pretty short notice of this one. Can I also remind all members that in accordance with, I had written it down somewhere, point 6 of the, 11.6.3, any members who have signed the call-in cannot vote when we get to that point later in the evening. And then one other point, I just thought it would be useful to set out how I intend to run this meeting. So I intend, as soon as I finish, to ask Dan Lister, as the lead member for the call-in, to set out his concerns and what it is he's seeking from the committee. I will then invite James Hill to speak as a member of the public. I also have a statement from Councillor Julie Davenport that she wished to have read, so we can take that at that point. And then I will ask for the portfolio holder and Fiona or Stuart, or Fiona and Stuart, to get that response to that, and probably a presentation that will give the background for Cabinet and their thinking in leading up to the decision. And then after we've had that, we can then have a debate and work through the relevant parts of the call-in. And when we get to the end of all of that, the conclusion, as I see it, we have two options. The committee can vote to refer the item back to Cabinet, attaching any decisions that it wishes Cabinet then to reconsider and other recommendations that it wants to see changed, or it can vote to take no further action, at which point the Cabinet decision will stand and be enacted immediately. I think the third option that the Constitution allows, that is contrary to the policy framework, is not relevant. So I trust that is clear. Sorry.
Through you, Chair, just to add, there are a couple of other members who aren't, and a couple of other councillors who aren't committee members who indicated in advance they wanted to speak. So that's Councillor Chowan and Councillor Kilbride. Yeah. I don't know if you...
Well, I did ask the supporting audience how many of them wished to speak, and most of them did. So when we get to that debate point, I think it'd be a good idea then to bring in other member voices at that point. Just indicate. So, Dan.
Thank you, Chair. The Cabinet decision of the 5th of May covers two things: insourcing waste and street cleansing services from June 2028, and residual waste collection frequency for wheeled bin households in Northampton and South Northamptonshire from fortnightly to every 3 weeks by spring 27. I'll deal with the frequency change first because it lands on residents' doorsteps soonest, and it is where the administration's case is the weakest. The administration talks a great deal about listening to residents. The committee should therefore read paragraph 7.31 of the Cabinet report carefully, because it reveals exactly how much that commitment is worth when it becomes inconvenient. The report states that the outcome of the frequency change is unlikely to change as a result of further consultation, not because consultation had been completed and produced a clear answer, but simply because the administration has already made up its mind, which is not listening but telling residents what their views do not matter. The administration's answer to that deficit is a communications campaign about telling residents what is happening rather than asking them what they think. Communicating a decision already taken is not consultation, and this committee should not accept it as a substitute for one. A Cabinet report that tells residents their views are unlikely to change the outcome before the views have even been sought is not a report that meets the standards this Council sets for itself. The administration will point to a 2023 consultation as its evidence base. The full findings were not included in the Cabinet papers. The committee should know that those findings actually say, because they tell a very different story to what the Cabinet was given. That consultation was designed to inform the development of the resources and waste strategy, and its own introduction states it was not a referendum and it was not a decision-making process. The administration may argue that the strategy endorsed harmonisation and that this decision flows from it. The strategy did not endorse the principle of appropriate harmonised waste services across West Northamptonshire. It did not specify the direction of that harmonisation, and it did not say collection should move to 3 weekly. Crucially, it used the word appropriate, which by definition requires an assessment of what is appropriate for each community. That assessment has not been done. Imposing the Daventry model on Northampton without any specific area evidence is not appropriate harmonisation. It is the administration deciding what appropriate means and then using a strategy principle it did not write to justify a conclusion the consultation it did not commission explicitly rejected. The Cabinet report cites a 67% figure as support for the frequency change. The question that produced that figure asked residents whether all households should have their waste collected in the same way and the same frequency, which says nothing about whether that frequency should be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. It is a question about consistency across the authority, and a resident in Northampton or South Northamptonshire answering yes may have been expressing a preference for Daventry to come up to fortnightly collections, not for their own service to be cut. The administration has taken a question about fairness and presented it as a mandate for reduction, and those are fundamentally different things. The consultation then asked residents directly. When offered the specific option of keeping their current size bin and having it collected every 3 weeks, the arrangement we are now proposing to impose, 65% of respondents said no and only 27% said yes. The administration has taken a consultation in which nearly 2/3 of respondents rejected the precise arrangement now being imposed when asked directly, buried that finding, selected a different and far less specific question, and presented it to Cabinet as evidence of public support for the very outcome those residents opposed. This is not presenting evidence honestly, but selecting the number that suits the conclusion and hoping nobody reads the rest of the report. The committee should also understand the scale of this evidence base. West Northamptonshire has a full population of about 425,000. The consultation received just 1,900 fully completed responses, less than half of 1% of the people this decision affects. From a survey that was not a decision-making process by its own admission, and when it asked about frequency directly, produced a result this administration chose not to mention. On that basis, a permanent change is being made to services for the majority of households across Northampton and South Northamptonshire. There is one further finding this committee should know. When residents were asked to rank their environmental priorities, tackling fly tipping came second with 471 number one rankings. Residents said clearly in 2023 that fly tipping was their second highest concern. The administration's response has been to plan a reduction in collection frequency in an area already placing this authority 10th highest in England for fly tipping incidents, without a single area-specific risk assessment for the consequences. Then there is the Task and Finish group, described in the Cabinet report as a cross-party geographically representative member engagement. This group was geographically representative, with 3 members drawn from each area of the authority, and I acknowledge that. Geographic representation and political balance are, however, two entirely different things. 5 of its 9 members were from the ruling Reform Group, giving the administration an outright majority in a body it describes as cross-party and representative. Its terms of reference explicitly ruled out continuing to operate services on a geographic basis before the group met once. So the group was not asked whether harmonisation was right, but told it was not happening and told it was happening and asked how. Its proceedings in the terms of reference's own words were not public and were kept private and confidential, with no public record of what was said, what was challenged, or what was overruled. This is not the kind of transparent engagement that a decision of this scale demands. Now the timetable, because this is where I also want the committee to focus on carefully. The report proposes spring 2027 for the frequency change, not June 28 when the new service begins, but spring 27, a full 12 months before the service these residents are being harmonised into even exists. The committee should ask what justifies that specific date, because when you test it against the administration's own report, there is no answer. On the financial case, the report states that the savings in the Northampton area may not be realised until the Veolia contract ends in June 2028, regardless of when the frequency changes, meaning the financial benefit of doing this in spring 2027 rather than in June 2028 does not exist. On the operational case, the vehicles are not yet procured, the routes have not yet been optimised, the workforce has not been transferred and the specification has not been finalised. So residents are being asked to lose their fortnightly collection 12 months before the service they are being harmonised into even begins. On the contractual case, the North and Veolia contracts do not expire until June 28 and there is no contractual driver for spring 27 whatsoever. The committee is left with a timetable this administration cannot justify its merits, and I invite them to justify it on the record today. If the answer is sound, then residents will accept it. If the answer is that a year is a more comfortable distance from a May 29 election than 8 months, residents across this authority will want to know that too, and they will draw their own conclusions. On fly tipping, this report cites the Daventry experience as evidence that 3 weekly collections are safe. I represent Daventry members and I'm not disputing that record, but the data shows Daventry and Northampton are not comparable environments and the gap between them is not marginal. FOI figures show that 18,000 fly tipping incidents across West Northamptonshire in the year to September 24. 16,000, nearly 89% of those were in Northampton, while Daventry recorded 1,500 and South Northamptonshire 522. DEFRA's own 24-25 figures place West Northamptonshire 10th highest in England for fly tipping incidents, and the report itself acknowledges that fly tipping and antisocial incidents have increased significantly in Northampton since the Veolia contract began in 28. Against that backdrop, the administration has procured no area-specific fly tipping risk assessment for any part of the authority, and the committee should not allow this decision to stand until it has. It itself acknowledges that fly tipping. Every community losing a fortnightly collection deserves proper consultation and a proper evidence base before that change is imposed on them. Residents in Northampton and South Northamptonshire have had neither, and that applies equally across both areas. On best value, this administration is committing to building an operational workforce of approximately 300 staff and procuring a fleet estimated at approximately £20 million, with a procurement method still undecided, on the basis of a model the report itself describes as an estimate containing variables and assumptions subject to change, with no competitive tender having been run. The report acknowledges that the true cost of a contract would only be known at the end of a competitive procurement process, a process that has not been run, and the administration has used uncertainty about the Employment Rights Act to justify not running it, while acknowledging the same report that the Act's implications for insourcing are equally unknown, deploying uncertainty selectively to avoid the scrutiny that competitive tender would bring. My alternative recommendations are as follows. On the frequency change, I ask the committee to refer Resolution C back to Cabinet with a requirement to commission a full area-by-area assessment of appropriate collection frequency across the whole of West Northamptonshire, including Daventry, so that when this decision is finally taken, it is taken on the basis of evidence specific to each community, rather than on the basis of a survey whose relevant findings this administration chose not to mention. That assessment should include targeted consultation with affected wheeled bin households, area-specific fly tipping risk modelling, and a clear published operational justification for whatever implementation timetable is proposed. Cabinet should also be required to consider whether a differentiated approach, recognising the different circumstances of each part of this authority, is more appropriate than a single timetable imposed across the board. On best value, I ask the committee to require a formalised market testing exercise before the insourcing programme passes the point of no return, so that this council can demonstrate to every taxpayer in West Northamptonshire that it has properly discharged its best value duty. Chair, I will close with this. The current administration reached back to a consultation it did not commission, suppressed the finding that 65% of respondents rejected the precise arrangement now being imposed when asked directly, selected a different statistic and presented it to Cabinet as evidence to support it. It established a review group, placed its own Cabinet member in the chair, kept the proceedings private and confidential, predetermined the scope before a single meeting took place and described the result as cross-party representative engagement. It chose a timetable which its own report provides no financial, operational or contractual justification. It produced no risk assessment for an area generating nearly 9 in 10 of the authority's fly tipping incidents, and it had its own report state that consulting the residents who will lose their service is unlikely to change the outcome anyway. West Northamptonshire's residents did not elect this council to be told their views were unlikely to change the outcome. They elected it to listen, to act on what it hears, and to make decisions that can withstand scrutiny. This decision cannot withstand that scrutiny, and this committee has the power to say so today. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. James?
Good evening, Chair and members of the panel. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. For those of you who don't know me, I'm James Hill. I'm starter of the Stop the Stink petition and also a former councillor at West Northants. I'm here tonight to represent the 2,700 plus residents who of today have signed a petition to demand that their black bin collections are not cut. I'm here to urge this panel to recommend a total rejection of the free weekly collection proposal. Let me be clear from the outset, this is not about party politics or just attacking the Reform administration. I'm well aware that these plans were originally discussed and tabled by officers in January 2025 under the previous administration. I opposed them then and I oppose them now, regardless of what party is in control of the council. My position remains consistent because of the impact on our residents. I believe that the vast majority of residents served by West Northants, bin collections are the most visible and essential service they receive from this council. It is the one service that every household relies upon. Yet at a time when we are demanding more from taxpayers, we are offering them less in return. We know that residents are already struggling with a 4.95% council tax increase, a £69 garden waste charge, and significant hikes in parking fees. To demand record high contributions while simultaneously eroding the most basic visible public service is, in my view, morally indefensible. The council argues for harmonisation across the authority, but Northampton is not rural Daventry. We have a large, densely populated urban town, in which many of our wards there is high-density housing, HMOs, and a lack of outdoor storage, which will make storing 21 days' worth of rotten waste physically impossible and unhygienic. If harmonisation is truly the goal, then I suggest that we bring Daventry back in line with the fortnightly service enjoyed by Northampton and South Northants residents, not the other way around. I am not alone in these concerns. There is a powerful cross-party consensus against these plans. And as well as the Conservative group, I stand with our local MP, Mike Reeder, who has warned of maggot-infested bins. I also agree with Labour leader Councillor Sally Keeble, who has called the move a disgrace to a sensitive universal service. Most significantly, I am joined by members of the Reform's own administration, Councillor Nigel Beryl, who has publicly stated that the community's views must be heard and taken seriously. Leaving waste for 3 weeks will lead to foul odours and attract rats and vermin, posing a genuine public health risk. When you own backbenchers, the local MP and nearly 3,000 residents are sounding the alarm, the council must stop and listen. 2.5 minutes, Chair. I ask the panel to listen to these voices and recommend the council abandon the move to 3 weekly collections to protect our vital fortnightly service. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, James. We can take Julie's contribution whenever we've got the other members. Sure. Yeah. Okay. Fiona, Nigel, I think you've got a presentation.
As well, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, did you?
Thank you, Chair. Stuart's sharing the presentation, so we'll have to do a next slide, please, as we go through. For those that don't know me, I'm Fiona Unett. I'm the Assistant Director for Waste.
It's not working. You want to move?
You okay?
Well, I
Carry
can't
on.
see it because that one's not working.
Oh.
Move on.
Yeah.
Sorry, Chair, are we not going to hear from other speakers first?
Well, I said we can get a general discussion then, and we'll bring the other members in.
I don't know, does anybody have prepared something that they wanted to say rather than general discussion?
Is that all right? Okay. Has anybody prepared something that they want to get off their chest now?
I'm happy to wait until after the presentation.
Yeah, that's what I thought would actually give a more informed discussion.
That's fine, just make
Thank
sure
you.
that there's an opportunity.
Yeah, I'm going to just move around. Is there an extra seat there?
Okay. So Councillor List has already clarified the proposals in the Cabinet paper, but again, just for the benefit, I think it's helpful that we start just by looking at them. So the first proposal is to deliver the waste collections and street cleansing services by a directly employed team from 2028 and the procurement of the associated contracts. And the main benefits of this proposal are the direct control of service delivery.
Could I just ask, is it possible to enlarge to magnify the size of it? Because I can't have difficulty reading
I
it.
don't believe it is now that they're
not
being
fit.
shared.
You can't.
I don't think that's enough.
Would it be helpful to move closer?
No,
I could email it to you.
Do you want to swap seats?
no, it's okay.
We should.
So the main benefits of bringing the service in-house are direct control of service delivery, flexibility to adapt to necessary changes and responsiveness to any issues which arise. And of course, the Council will have full transparency over costs. And this is relevant due to some of the concerns raised about the cleansing standards related to the second proposal, which we'll come on to in a moment, because bringing the service in-house means we will have the discretion to ring-fence cleansing resources, which will ensure routine and responsive street cleansing is completed to expected standards. So moving on, thanks Stuart. The second proposal, as we're all aware, is that residual waste will be collected every 3 weeks from houses that have their own wheeled bin. So just to emphasise that point, there are no changes that are proposed for properties with SAC collections or properties who use communal bins. And this is part of a comprehensive curbside waste collection service. And food waste collection will continue to be collected weekly, recyclables will be collected fortnightly, and those additional opt-in services for garden waste, waste electricals and batteries, textiles and bric-a-bracs, they will continue. So the main benefits of this proposal is fairness to ensure that all residents across West Northants are treated the same. We also expect it to increase recycling performance, which we'll come on to later, and that in turn will help the Council retain extended producer responsibility funding. It will also reduce residual waste tonnage, which will help the Council control the costs associated with residual waste disposal. And because we've got a harmonised service, it means we're able to make waste services as efficient as possible, reducing collection costs. And just to address the point, why 2027, that's because it ties in with the National Simpler Recycling Programme, because in 2027, flexible plastics can be added in to residents' wheeled bin, which will enable additional space for residual waste. In terms of the grounds for call-in, we've summarised the main points from the call-in notice, and again, I'll cover each of these during the presentation. First one being that 3 weekly collections won't work in an urban area such as Northampton. The second being that additional fly tipping and pest control issues may have costs which we haven't taken into account. The third point is around concerns about the consultation on the proposal. And finally, the assessment of the impact on equality and diversity. So moving on, it is a relatively long cabinet paper of 25 pages. So on this slide, I've just signposted to sections which are relevant to the concerns which have been raised. And it's also worth noting that there were a number of background papers, including the Equalities Impact Screening Assessment, which were available to members on request. Those papers do include a summary of the members' task and finish group meetings. The minutes weren't marked as private and confidential, and all of those minutes are available to those members who attended. This additional information may have been particularly helpful to those members who weren't part of the members' task and finish group. But again, looking at the next slide, for members who weren't part of the task and finish group, on this slide we've summarised the main recommendations, which were also included in the Cabinet paper. In total, there were 5 meetings of the members' task and finish group, and they focused on different areas of waste collection and street cleansing. I won't go through each of those recommendations in turn, but just to highlight, we do intend to write a clear specification for cleansing and waste collections, and we will be monitoring and inspecting those standards, even though it's an in-house service. We are proposing that we harmonise waste collections, and members of the task and finish group were comfortable with that. And we are proposing that we ring-fence the cleansing resource. And for reasons which I've just mentioned, that will be important when we come on to looking at fly tipping and cleansing standards. So turning to the specific grounds for call-in, first looking at the statement that 3 weekly collections of residual waste won't work in Northampton because it's a predominantly urban environment with high density of housing. Apologies, Councillor Keeble, I realise this slide, the font is much smaller, but on the left-hand side what we see is a list of authorities in chronological order who have adopted 3 weekly collections. And the first authorities to implement 3 weekly collection of residual waste were the councils within the Greater Manchester area, including Bury, Rochdale, Oldham, Wigan and Salford, who started 3 weekly collections about a decade ago. Since then, many other authorities have taken the step, including most recently, right down at the bottom of the list, Blackpool, who adopted 3 weekly collections for residual waste in April this year. Up on the top right, you'll see a list of 5 English local authorities who are planning to change their residual waste collection frequency this year. And then I've also noted authorities in Scotland and Wales, including a couple of authorities who collect residual waste every 4 weeks. Although I do appreciate that there are different national policy expectations in Wales and Scotland. Moving on and looking at the population density and the index of multiple deprivation, these are just 2 of the factors which influence waste collections. They include housing type as well, which we'll look at later. So this slide down at the bottom compares West Northants as a whole, but we've also looked specifically at Northampton in terms of both population density, which is comparable with Salford, and also the IMD, which is an index which is used to measure factors that are listed on the right-hand side, such as income, employment and living environment. You'll see that Northampton is comparable, is also the lowest in terms of IMD compared with the authorities who have 3 weekly collections. So looking specifically at a couple of the areas in Daventry and Northampton, over on the left-hand side, so this is using National Statistics data set. On these slides, which is showing the index of deprivation, dark blue generally indicates a more deprived area. So starting on the left-hand side, the area that's outlined in pink is Southbrook, and it is more deprived than 88% of neighbourhoods nationally. Moving over onto the right, the purple area is Talavera, which is 64%, and Rectory Farm, which is 80%. So you'll see that even in Daventry, there are some areas which are more deprived than the Northampton ones. So this slide compares Daventry and Northampton with Wigan, Bury and Rochdale, which you'll remember I mentioned earlier already have 3 weekly collections. So where there are, just again a reminder, I think it's appropriate to say that where there are terraced houses who don't have an individual wheeled bin, so they're on SAC collections for residual waste, we are not proposing any changes, and residual waste will continue to be collected every week. And you'll see on that top line just the housing density. We could easily have put photographs of Northampton on there as well, which would have looked very similar to Wigan, Bury and Rochdale. Looking on that bottom line, you can see comparison of indices of deprivation, and again, just to highlight that blue means that an area is more deprived. I should say that Wigan, it's the photograph at the top and the coloured chart at the bottom, which correspond with Wigan, and likewise for Bury and likewise for Rochdale. So again, you can see that Wigan, Bury and Rochdale are not dissimilar to Northampton, both in terms of housing density and deprivation. Looking specifically at housing type, which is on the next slide, we've made comparisons of 4 basic types of property. So Northampton has fewer flats and terrace properties than Blackpool or Bury. And again, just to emphasise, 3 weekly residual waste collection is only proposed where a property has an individual wheeled bin. So for many flats and terrace properties, there won't be a change. Unless, of course, by moving to 3 weekly, we're able to release capacity within the existing arrangements, and that might mean we can actually make improvements. So some properties, for example, that have communal bins which are collected fortnightly, we may be able to make some improvements in those areas. So next slide to focus specifically on Northampton, and these 2 maps are just to try and show where on the right hand side we've got the SAC collection areas, and they generally correspond with the areas of high density housing, which is shown on the left hand side. And again, just to emphasise the point, where there are SAC collections, there are no changes proposed to these areas. Moving on, I've got some case studies. I've got 4 case studies for the authorities who've already implemented 3 weekly collection of residual waste. And we have focused on those authorities who've got long established collections, and they are urban deprived areas, to give you some assurance that if 3 weekly collection can work in these areas, we also believe it will work in Northampton. So Bury was the first authority to implement 3 weekly collections more than a decade ago. And you'll see there the different collection services that they have. Residents have 2 recycling bins, which are collected every 3 weeks. Food waste is co-collected with garden waste every fortnight. No side waste is permitted. And in Bury, for larger families, families with children in nappies and residents with medical needs, they're all able to request a larger capacity bin. Bury also, unusually, has restrictions on the number of visits that a resident can make to their household waste recycling centres, and residents are able to make 52 visits per year. Even with that additional measure, no increase in fly tipping was observed, and their recycling rate, when they introduced 3 weekly collections, increased by 6%. Looking at Rochdale, very similar to Bury, they introduced 3 weekly collections also more than a decade ago. They have 2 recycling bins collected every 3 weeks. Food waste is co-collected with garden waste, and on alternate weeks, it's collected in a caddy. So they do have weekly food waste collections, but it is alternate garden waste and then in a caddy. Similarly to Bury, families with children in nappies, residents with medical needs, they're able to order a larger bin, and side waste isn't permitted. In Rochdale, recycling increased by more than 13%. Wigan, you're starting to spot a theme here, I'm sure. Another one of the Greater Manchester authorities introduced in 2017. They also have 2 recycling bins which are collected every 3 weeks, and food waste is co-collected with garden waste every alternate week. Families can apply for a larger bin, as I've outlined for the other 2 authorities. No side waste is permitted. Recycling increased by nearly 8%, and there was no increase in fly tipping. And then the final case study is Blackpool, obviously a recent introduction in a challenging council area with high density housing and deprivation. Again, they have 2 recycling bins collected every 3 weeks. Food waste is collected weekly. Families are able to apply for a larger capacity bin. No side waste is permitted. So we've contacted all these authorities to ask about fly tipping, and Blackpool have said it's too early to have detailed statistics, but their initial indications do not suggest an increase in fly tipping. So looking at recycling rate changes, which I've highlighted in each of those case studies, here's just a summary of how the recycling rate changes. And one of the comments in the call-in notice was that performance could be improved by targeted education, community incentivisation and better recycling infrastructure. Well, I agree. Waste education certainly helps remind people what they can put in each bin, and it encourages residents to use their waste services properly. But step changes in performance are normally only achieved when we make a service change. You may have noted that the case study authorities use 2 recycling bins for residents which are collected every 3 weeks. And it's an opportunity for me to remind you that residents are able to request additional recycling capacity in West Northants for both dry mixed recycling and for food waste. So why does recycling matter? Oh, can we just flick back? Sorry, Stuart. A bit quick. On the right-hand side, you'll see some of the treatment costs for each material stream. So each material stream that's recycled, whether it's dry mix recycling, garden waste or food waste, costs less to treat than residual waste. So in essence, the more we can recycle, the more cost effective our waste collection service is. But not only that, we receive extended producer responsibility payments, which is a new funding from government. And to secure this, our performance in West Northants is measured against other authorities. So if we can't keep pace with other councils' performance, the risk is that our extended producer responsibility payments will reduce. Looking at fly tipping, you can see here on the chart that similar to Bury, Wigan and Blackpool, the fly tipping in Daventry, which is the blue line, actually reduced in 2018 when Daventry introduced 3 weekly collections, which was the opposite of the national trend. I mentioned earlier that one of the advantages of bringing the service in-house is that we are able to ring-fence the cleansing resources. So we would achieve better cleansing standards and we'd be able to be better, to respond better if there are any issues. In terms of pests, normally they're only attracted to food waste, and just a reminder, food waste will be collected weekly from all households. So if households use their food waste collection service, there won't be waste in the residual bin which will attract pests. Again, looking further at cost considerations, the Cabinet paper does explain that we've looked at the option of changing residents in Daventry to a fortnightly collection of residual waste. And not unexpectedly, it will cost more. We've also looked at changing the South area and the Northampton area residents to 3 weekly collections, which we believe will make a saving. And although an indication of the cost and the saving of these options were included, these were indicative because there are other financial considerations as part of this process. I mentioned earlier that one of the advantages of harmonising our services is that we can optimise our routes and make the services as efficient as possible across West Northamptonshire. And I've just mentioned when we were looking at the recycling stats that we would expect residual waste to go down as well, which is a benefit because of the financial impact of the emissions trading scheme. This is mentioned briefly in the Cabinet paper, but it may be helpful if I explain that this will be applied to all waste from 2028, and it will be an additional cost to the authority depending on how much residual waste we treat and what the carbon content of that waste is. And the final cost consideration is the extended producer responsibility funding, which, as I've mentioned, is dependent on our performance compared with other councils. In terms of the common concerns, which have been raised. We have closely been monitoring other concerns, obviously on social media, and these do include concerns about vermin. But as I've said, then vermin are normally attracted to food waste, and residents are able to dispose of their food waste weekly. Residents who have children in nappies or who have larger families or who have medical needs have also raised concerns. An additional capacity is available on request, and that's within our existing policy. This is a similar approach to other 3 weekly authorities such as Bury and Rochdale and Wigan, who I outlined earlier, who also allow residents in these situations to apply for additional capacity. In terms of consultation, concerns have been raised about the consultation on these proposals. We have carefully considered different options for consultation, and we reached the conclusion that it would be difficult to conduct an open and transparent consultation in advance of making a decision without falsely raising expectations. Because a consultation is not the same as asking residents to vote on proposals, and I do appreciate that it's human nature to be cautious of change. So it would have been disingenuous to consult and then appear not to listen to residents' views. So instead, what we've done is we've consulted with members who represent their communities, and that's by forming the cross-party group of members with all geographic areas represented. As I said earlier, we've held 5 meetings, with each meeting being themed, presenting information and having an open discussion, and at the end of each meeting capturing members' preferences, which were then set out in the Cabinet paper.
Can I just... Oh, is it working? Sorry. Obviously, this is mainly a Conservative calling, isn't it? So just look at the graph there. So you've got the Conservative, obviously Fiona Baker came onto the group at the beginning. She attended, I think, maybe once or maybe twice, but then obviously she had all her commitments. And then obviously Dan, Councillor Lister, he proposed Rebecca Breeze, Councillor Breeze, who I thought would be a good candidate. Obviously, she had my portfolio before, and she came once. Well, she didn't come once. It was an online meeting that time, and that online meeting was about, on the 3rd week, was about 3 weekly bin collections. So your representative was at that meeting, she listened to all the evidence, she had no comments to say, and obviously didn't feed anything back to your group. So as far as about saying it's not a political, I totally disagree, because it is political, this. And if your own representatives cannot even bother coming to the meeting, then that's not our problem.
Just save that for later, and we'll carry on with the presentation, please. Fiona.
We've also regularly provided updates to this Scrutiny Committee, and the Resources and Waste Strategy was referenced earlier. We have taken into account the principles of the Resources and Waste Strategy, which was consulted on and agreed by Cabinet in 2023. So Principle 1 is to provide appropriate harmonised waste services, and we are tailoring those services to take account of housing type. As I've mentioned already several times, we will not be making changes for households who are on SAC collection of residual waste or for properties who have communal residual waste collection. We are only proposing changes for properties that have a wheeled bin. There are other principles within the waste strategy that this proposal also aligns to, including moving the waste up the hierarchy, recycling more, value for money waste services, and sustainability. What we are proposing to do is extensive resident engagement, because we do recognise... Sorry, Stuart, can you move on? Yeah. Thank you. We do recognise that effective communication and engagement with residents is key to the success of implementing 3 weekly collection. So we are planning an engagement programme in 3 phases. The first phase, listening to residents' concerns so that we can address these. And these activities will be a mixture of face-to-face engagement, also using our website and social media. And I did say earlier, we have been looking at the comments on social media and theming those so that we can really target our communications. We're also planning to provide residents with information about what materials can go in each bin, so residents can use their curbside waste service effectively, because we believe if residents are putting the right materials in each bin, there will be space in their residual waste bin to manage 3 weekly collections. And the third part of the engagement is helping residents get ready for the new service by doing simple things like registering for the app and asking for assistance with their collection or a larger bin where they need it. The final point is just around the Equalities Impact Assessment, and referring back to the call-in notice, it was challenged whether we had properly considered and properly assessed issues for residents with protected characteristics. So an equality and anti-poverty screening assessment was completed, and it was summarised in the Cabinet report, although a full version was available on request. And the screening assessment does acknowledge that there are considerations for residents who may be elderly or who have a disability or who are pregnant or have young children or who may have a lower income. The assessment noted the measures that the Council has taken in order to mitigate these potential issues, which includes those that I've mentioned earlier, including larger capacity bins and assisted collections. So finally, just a couple of summary slides on the information that I've shared this evening. Regarding the concern that 3 weekly collection of residual waste won't work in Northampton, I have shared examples from other authorities who have 3 weekly collection for residual waste and who also have similar housing density and deprivation. A reminder, we're only proposing changes for properties with wheeled bins, not for houses who have a sack collection or communal bins. And residual waste is only one part of a comprehensive curbside collection service. The second concern was that fly tipping will increase, which will increase costs. Well, fly tipping hasn't increased in other authority areas that collect residual waste every 3 weeks. But the proposal to deliver services in-house also helps address this concern, because we can ring-fence the cleansing resources and use the efficiencies to make sure we target any issues. There is a cost impact if we don't take forward this proposal due to the cost of the emissions trading scheme and the potential lost extended producer responsibility funding. Addressing the concern on consultation, we have worked with a cross-party group of members. We've aligned the proposal with the principles of the waste strategy, which we have consulted on, and we are planning extensive engagement to listen to residents' concerns and address them. And finally, turning to the equalities considerations, we have considered those residents who have protected characteristics, and the screening assessment does note the mitigations which are available. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Fiona. So, do any of the members, so I have Councillor Chowan down as wishing to speak and Councillor Kilbride, and I also have, which I'll, when one of you are speaking, I'll find. So, Councillor Chowan.
Thank you, Chairman. And thank you to the committee for coming together this evening to discuss this issue, which is really important to the residents of Northampton. Just a couple of points. I just want to come back on the presentation as well. The other points have already been shared around the housing population density in Northampton being far different from Daventry and South Northants. Having the high mows and the terrace flats as well. And naturally these areas generate more waste as well. By its very nature, Northampton has a higher population turnover, and this does impact its recycling behaviour as well. And being an urban area, it does experience more fly tipping, and some of these points were covered earlier. It is very different to Daventry and South Northants, and I think that the blanket approach is going to be detrimental to Northampton as an area. But going back to the presentation that was just shared, the comparison was made for Bury, Rochdale, Oldham, Scotland and Wales. These are not close matches when we're looking at geography and socioeconomic background. It is more urban. Those areas are more deprived and more ethnically diverse as well. I would have liked to have seen a comparison with Cambridgeshire, Huntingdonshire, Aylesbury Vale, Sherwell and Harborough. Those areas are more aligned with West Northamptonshire than Bury, Oldham and Rochdale are. So it would be nice, I would have liked to have seen that information as well. Sorry, the Cabinet member's making a bit of a face, so what was that about?
Hang on, just let her finish and then we can have a debate. Carry on.
Thank you. The other thing I was going to say was that, I thought we would have a mature conversation today, but the Cabinet member decided to make it political. So my question to him is, how does he feel with the Reform administration turning Northampton into Birmingham? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, okay. Yes, okay. Andy? Just don't respond until people have had their chance.
Thank you, Chair. Forgive me dressing down this evening. It's been baking hot out there. A bit like all the black bins out there, stinking rubbish everywhere. You know, we know that the environment is getting hotter and hotter over the next few years, and obviously we don't want that smell, do we? You know, it's all right getting bigger bins, as your officers say, for those larger families, but it's still there stinking, isn't it? It's going to be there for 3 weeks. And, you know, why would we want to compare ourselves with Blackpool? I was in Blackpool last year. I know Blackpool very well. I won't be going back to Blackpool. Bury, Oldham, Rochdale. I know it very well, Councillor Stansfield. We've had this conversation, and it's not the best analogy you should have chosen, because they are not the best areas for the rubbish there. But here's so. Anyway, so as council officers, as councillors, we're here to make a difference. We're here to listen to our residents. Officers have got a job to do themselves. They want to sort of like get you to go to the 3 weeks and to save the £880,000. But residents have already spoken. You know, you're approaching 2,700 on Stink the Bin campaign. You need to listen to your residents. Many of you reformed councillors are in the urban areas. You know, they're not happy. They don't want 3 weekly bins. You know, you need to listen to the population of Northampton. What's the impact? You know, if you go 3 weekly, yes, there will be more increased fly tipping. You are drowning in fly tipping at the moment. Officers, you're saying that, or you'll be able to cope better next time. You won't, because you can't cope now. You know, most of our public black bins have a black sack next to them. Which begs the question, you said you want to bring it in-house to make it, you know, you can respond better. Why aren't officers responding now and enforcing the contract? Why are you not getting the likes of Ida Verdi out there to do their job? And you expect those councillors to believe you'll do that job next time? I don't believe that'll be the case. Councillor Soap says, you know, there'll be £880,000 in savings. He said that the previous administration had said, you left debt within the council. Will the 880,000 alleged savings, you know, will that be ring-fenced to sort of knock off any potential debt, or is that being diverted to other resources within the council? I'd like to know that answer, please. Like I said, it's our council, and we should give good value. Does going 3 weekly give good value to our residents? No. The answer is no. Does it make it a better place to live? Well, the answer is again, no, not if it's 3 weekly. I was against it going from 1 to 2 and 2 to 3. You know, when's it going to go 3 to 4? We've heard all these promises in the past. So to me, no. You've said recycling rates have gone up in other areas of, in the northwest, a whole 6%. Well, knock me over with a feather. 6% is neither here nor there in the big scheme of things. When you look at the amount of flights which are knocking around, you've said that officers have said, rats, vermin are attracted to food in the brown bins. Well, they're also attracted to the black bins as well, because as WNC Communications say, if you have a pizza box and your pizza has touched the cardboard on the pizza box, you've got to put it in the black bin. Anything that is contaminated with food goes in the black bin. That's the way your rules work. So therefore, they will be looking at the black bins. In fairness, you say, 2 weekly sacks will be unaffected. Well, you've got 2 weekly sack collections, but 3 weekly bin collections. That's not harmonisation. That's picking and choosing to suit your narrative. So come on, as councillors, what we should be doing is what's best for our residents. So I would ask you to go back to Cabinet and to have a full consultation, because your consultation of just over 1,000 people, as opposed to an online petition of nearly 2,700, doesn't make sense. So that's all I've got to say. And Councillor Stansfield, you have made this political by pointing that out earlier on, and Reform stands for 3 weekly bins. Okay. Conservative stands for 2 weekly bins. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Before you go there, Andy, you make a lot of assertions about 3 weekly bin. It will increase. Is there any evidence from anywhere that you can point the committee to find it? Because obviously we've had a lot from Fiona on the officer side, and it did come through the working group. But I'm looking for evidence and facts rather than opinion.
I go to the northwest quite regularly, and I see the amount of rubbish around there, around the likes of Rochdale and Aldermanbury, and we want West Northamptonshire to be better than the northwest. That's what I'm saying. We need to do what's best for our residents. You shouldn't be comparing us to other areas across the country. Otherwise, you would have compared us, like Councillor Shahan said, to Cambridgeshire and Huntingdon. That would be more in line, potentially. But, for me, the residents have spoken. They don't want 3 weekly bins.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, you can come in when we get round to it.
So I acknowledge the amount of work that the officers have put into this, and there's quite a lot of reasoned evidence before you. My concern is over the last 5 years, what I've experienced in the inconsistencies and the deficiencies sometimes with our communications and rollout of various things. So one of the challenges I had up until February last year was a rollout of black bins to parts of my former ward, and that took 4 years to implement. 4 years, and as the officer will know, of constant back and forward to go from sacks to bins. And then we've got inconsistencies with how we collect the rubbish from the flats. So some are in individual bins, like on Blackthorn, Thorpelands, but then you've got blocks of flats that are communal, like on Talavera, where you've got communal bins, and sacks in Rectory Farm. The problem is we've got so many legacy issues where we really haven't thought things through, where our communications don't always reach where they need to reach. And sometimes I've been promised stuff and there's been inconsistencies in delivery. So, for example, the recycling sacks that have been rolled out to replace the boxes in various locations, well, there's been inconsistencies in the delivery of those sacks. So I've still got a situation where in my ward, having now escalated it twice, it still hasn't been done. So you promise something and it's not delivered. So I recognise the reasoning behind the 3 weekly collections, but my concern is that we have to be very, very, very clear on the strategy we're going to use with the communications. So I understand the 3 weekly collections. The problem is I am not confident that we'll deliver it properly, and the teething issues will be more immense than we expect. Coming on to fly tipping, yes, there's been sort of discussions about how basically you don't see an increase in fly tipping. Well, sometimes what ends up happening is people from black bins put their sacks out by flats or in flat areas that are under sacks. So you end up with shifting the sacks from one street to another street. So I think my concern has already been lined out by the Cabinet member is about enforcement as well. So I recognise the policy, recognise the 3 weekly, but housing, communications, enforcement, we have got to get these different parts of the organisation properly working, because I have real concerns about us creating problems and major teething problems which will do reputational harm to us as an organisation. And the fact we've also got 3 contractors at the time of the rollout, it will also probably have problems with the legacy of the existing contracts. So recognise the times constraints in terms of we have to go for this this deadline, but we have got to work with the contractors for that year, because if we don't, we'll get egg on our face. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Keith. I have a comment that Julie Davenport has sent in, so I shall read that. It said, I want to make it clear that from the outset that I personally do not have a problem with moving to 3 weekly household waste connections. In my own home, there's just one person. I don't have pets, litter trays, cages or hutches to clear out. I don't have mountains of non-recyclable packaging or nappies piling up. For me, Julie, this proposal would probably work absolutely fine. But this scrutiny meeting is not about me, Julie Davenport. It is about the people whose circumstances are very different. Families with young children getting through bags of nappies every week, residents with pets who cannot recycle pet waste, elderly or disabled residents living with medical incontinence products, larger households and HMOs where waste builds up far more quickly. Those residents simply cannot reduce their rubbish overnight. Food waste, hygiene waste and non-recyclable packaging are realities of modern life. What concerns me most is the order this is being done. We're being told that communication and support will come afterwards, after the decision has effectively been agreed. Surely proper consultation and communication with residents should happen before such a significant change is introduced. We heard this administration talk about understanding different demographics and different needs, urban against rural, when discussing parking policy in towns surrounding Northampton. So why are we not applying the same thinking here? Because one size does not fit all. And when we look at the figures, the savings being discussed is around £1 million. In that context of the overall West Northants budget, that's relatively small, yet the impact on residents' daily lives could be enormous if this goes wrong. So my concern is not simply about bins, it's about whether we are genuinely listening to residents before making decisions, and that will affect every household across West Northants. And that's from Councillor Julie Davenport. Right, is there anybody else at the back that wishes to speak? Anthony, were you indicating to speak? No? Mark? No? Sorry, who's that? Sorry. Steve? No. Do you want to say something, or you want to? Right.
Thank you, Chair. It does reek a little bit of hypocrisy, some of what we've heard tonight. So, as a former resident of Daventry, in the 3 years that this policy was implemented by the Conservatives before I moved into Northampton, I didn't see a single rat actually going anywhere near my waste, or not least the size, or what we think climbing vertically up our bins amok across the whole district, but there we go. There's also some things that are interesting. I'm really grateful to Fiona for that presentation. The members I was sat with there were very grateful for the detail. There was another area on there called Wigan that was referred to. So, known Cabinet member was referring to. I actually took a trip there yesterday for other purposes, but it did enable me to speak to a very large number of residents about what goes on in their area and what their pressures are, what they find. But it did give us an opportunity to question bin collections as well, and neither did they see the same issues that are being put forward as likely to happen, this impending doom on Northampton and South Northampton should we make this change. So I think we can strike that one off as well. Communications is a key part, and one of the things that we put in our priorities in September last year was about better communication, transparency with the public, accountability. And I'm really clear that this is a decision that's been called in, so this decision isn't valid until this meeting tonight has passed. But one thing I do take confidence in, and from meetings earlier today with our comms team, is about just how we will do the communication to our residents. And much like the comms we had and various members of the public and former members commenting all over social media of the impending doom of a household waste recycling centre booking system and problems that was never going to cause if it was handled properly. So I've spoken to the comms team and I can offer some assurance here today that I'm happy with the plans that are afoot to make sure this is a clinical piece of communication to the public. I'm grateful to the Cabinet member for handling that HWRC piece very, very well, and his officer next to him, that we got that right, and we've seen a fall in fly tipping recently. So there's nothing in this that I can see that causes an issue that I wouldn't have already brought to the fore before we took it to Cabinet and made the initial decision. I am really grateful that whilst we still have 2 weekly bin collections, we can clear this trash up tonight and not wait for 3 weeks to do it had we waited for a year or more. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. So we'll go over to the members of the committee. Fiona, you were waving at me.
Okay, I just have to just wade through some notes here and that I've highlighted in terms of to talk about. So when I actually put my hand up for you, it was with go to you were asking Councillor Kilbride about evidence. I think one of the things I'd like to sort of talk about on this is I think we need to be really careful here that when we're presenting facts aren't necessarily the same as truth and evidence. And Fiona has presented a very good presentation. I am not decrying anything that's in that in the slightest, but it's presented a lot of facts which aren't necessarily reflective of the full truth or actually evidence. So, for example, we've seen a lot of facts about the different types of housing, the different types of density within each of those areas. But the key question that says this is, but has that actually worked? If you were to ask residents, has it actually worked? I'm going to use Daventry as an example of within which the area I live in have asked those questions too. It might not be my ward. So you'll find some people that, as to make Julie's point, there are some people that say it's fine. There are others that say it really doesn't work. And yes, they might be, it was imposed 8 years on, but people are having to put up with it and work around it rather than actually say it works because they are left with no choice. So one of the things that I think is worth talking about, and Fiona, maybe you can clarify something that you said, because one of the things that does come up in all of this is the way that some people are having to work around it is do weekly additional runs to the recycling centres. Now that's a great inconvenience for a lot of people, particularly now that they are open at reduced hours. And there is also concern that given that we've now moved to where people have to book, so obviously what is being taken to and how many times people are going, there's concern that actually that's then going to start being curtailed and say, well, people are making too many trips to the tip. So I think that's something that actually needs to be addressed and looked at. I think it's also important to say that I do agree with some of the things that other people have said, is that I don't believe we're necessarily comparing like for like with the areas when we're looking at some of these areas. Yes, okay, you've got a concentration, but a Manchester areas are very, very different to Northampton, for example, in the way that urbanisation necessarily happens. And the whole area that we are actually looking at here isn't just a Manchester. We've also got, okay, you've got Daventry, you've got South Northants, which is areas of there which are more akin to a Daventry, but you've still got very different houses within that. So we're not comparing like for like. And I think at the outset, I think what I'd like to say is, I know I was one of the members that was on this and decided to call this in. I don't actually sit here for or against it as I stand at the moment. But what I do believe is that this decision wasn't necessarily reached taking into account the sufficient and some of the broader aspects, using genuine evidence, not just presenting fact as evidence and truth, which is very different, as I've said, and that there are also issues with the scheme development and the implementation. So has all that, I don't necessarily believe, been done in the full interest of residents with sufficient explanation or detail behind that decision, which has been transparent? And I think that is something that really is critical for residents and members to be able to make an informed choice. Another councillor, I can't remember who it was, also made the point about effective rollout. And I don't believe that we have sufficient joined-upness, if that's a word, within the council at the moment to actually make something like this effective. It very much feels like residents are being done to, not done with. And I think if I'm just going to look at an overall point here, in terms of the savings, I would really appreciate seeing a very full breakdown before any decision actually is made about how those savings have been arrived at, but also what are the comparable cost implications of doing this, or the cost of actually doing it as well, because that doesn't appear to have been costed fully in that respect. And then I guess largely...
Sorry, the cost of doing nothing or the cost of moving Daventry to 2 weekly?
No,
or what cost do you want to see?
So there are going to be some additional costs, for example, of bringing this into play, whether that's because you might have, I don't know, however many thousands of households that would like an additional bin, for example, or the cost of, as we said, the cost of, there are going to be additional costs that haven't actually been, or don't appear to have been considered within all of this. So that needs to be looked at in the costing as well.
But within the report, there was a line quoted from the MTFP of £250,000 that's been put in for to aid the transition, and it drops back out then in the
there is. But as I said, we're talking about costs again. Can we have the evidence fully presented in front of us? What are the exact cost savings? How are those going to be arrived at? And also, what are the cost implications of doing this as well? And then I think, lastly, we've got to be really careful here. As the start point, as what is the exact objective of this? What was the exact issue presented that this solution is trying to resolve? Is it, in fact, harmonisation, fairness across the board, when we've already heard the words saying we want everybody to be treated the same, but as we've seen, that isn't the case because not everybody is going to be treated the same? Are we trying to solve cost reduction, waste reduction, value for money for residents, increased recycling? Or is what we're actually trying to achieve additional payments into the council, i.e. the extended producer responsibility, making sure that we are keeping pace with performance of other councils, even if that performance isn't necessarily the reality of resident interests? Or is it that we want to avoid additional costs? What are the exact objectives that we want to achieve, and what is this seeking to resolve? Because I agree, there needs to be a balance between the voice of the resident and also practicalities, laws, regulations, and incoming issues. But I'm not seeing sufficient transparency being put to us at the moment in terms of the balance of those two things to be able to be confident that this is a right and proper decision. Thank you.
Okay. And can I just add another one? Is it that we're trying to implement this, the waste and resources strategy that is the adopted policy of the council?
But what I'm saying is we seem to have a lot of conflated objectives at the moment, rather than something which is really clear that this is trying to resolve. And I think from an acceptability and a decision-making point of view, that clarity should be provided, because it's all a little bit confused and conflated at the moment, and that doesn't enable good resident optics or decision-making or member decision-making.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Sally?
Thank you. It's not working.
Oh.
Oh.
There we go.
Thank you. Can I first say thank you very much for that presentation, which was very interesting and raised a lot of useful points. And some of my questions and observation actually arise out of that. The first thing which I really struggle with this is that I don't understand why the overarching aim is harmonisation, because for me, the overarching aim needs to be about the provision of the best possible waste and refuse collection service that we can possibly deliver for people in West Northant, bearing in mind that this is the universal service above all other, which everybody uses. And you obviously understand that within that there are financial constraints. Of course there are. There are policy objectives like increasing recycling, which is obviously a desirable outcome. And there are a number of other issues as well. And you might say that you don't want some people to feel that they're being completely left out by having a much more occasional service. However, the desired outcome has got to be that we have a spotless West Northants. And one of the issues that I think means that some people, like people in my ward, would feel really unhappy about this is that they haven't got a spotless area at present, and it's very hard to see how these proposals improve the situation. And if I'm really blunt about it, there's a lack of confidence that things will get better. And I think that if the service is to change, I think it's not just about communication, it's about building confidence that this is going to result in the problems that they email some of us endlessly about, that those problems are going to be dealt with. I was very struck in the presentation, actually, by how many of the areas the service won't be changed because they've got the black bags. It would be really useful to know, to have some idea of the proportions of percentages, the number of properties in each, so we can get some idea about what we're actually talking about in terms of numbers. But the other thing that struck me very much is, and it's something that some of us understand, is that there's quite a number of split areas, and Councillor Holland de la Mere also spoke about them, that there's some areas, and my area, that they have a mishmash, and sometimes one side of a street will be bins, and pretty much the opposite side of the street in some instances have got bags, and there's clear discrepancies in the standard of what happens in those areas. And also, I think this has already been mentioned, there's a little bit of, if you have a bag of rubbish, then put it over in the street that has a black bin collection, because there it will get cleared. And there needs to be real thinking about how this is going to be managed if the side with the black bins that's got a 3-weekly collection and the other side of the road that's got the 2-weekly collection, how you're going to seriously manage that, because I think that is going to be an absolutely massive challenge. The other thing is that, what I said at the start was that the outcome, the desired outcome, should be a clean West Northants everywhere. And if you look at the centre of Northampton, some people say that needs more than a once fortnightly residual waste collection, because the amount of waste that's coming out of some of those very high density areas is just so great. Now, it'd be interesting to know what happens in places like Blackpool, where you can get real problems of waste from when I've been up there. But there's certainly I've been around some other town centres where the town centre area is given like deep cleansing on a really regular basis. It's very carefully done because everybody understands that if you let your town centre get in a mess, then you damage the economic life of the area, because that is your main draw. And that is a really big problem in parts of central Northampton now. And it's also, actually it's what persuaded me to stand for election again was campaigning in bits of Castle Ward and just seeing the level of waste that is drifting around those streets. And that has a profound, I mean, that's not just an impact on local residents, that's an impact on the economic life of the area, and it needs to be sorted. And for central Northampton, particularly now you've got the increased density with some of those HIMOs. Well, they're not HIMOs, they're like hostel-style accommodation that's being opened up. And down the alleyways, you've got real problems of waste collection, and you probably need more frequent collections. The other thing which has bugged me ever since I read this report was in 591. Paragraph 591, it references historical local knowledge, which basically means the people who take the dust carts out know where to pick up the rubbish, but it's not documented yet. Which is a real nightmare, that. And what I want to know is, are you really going to get all that knowledge out of people by next spring? Because I don't think so. And if people think they're facing redundancy because of job changes, they might not be too well disposed to offer up the information either. So I think there's a real issue there. I mean, how much of your routes do you know about, and how much are you reliant on local knowledge to get that?
When this was discussed at the Waste Working Group, I think that was more of an issue for South Northants than Daventry and West, and than the borough, because both of them had an outsourced contract, so there was by default
yeah.
Tell me if I'm getting this wrong. There was a specification in place. It was South Northants, where they've been doing it in-house for years. That it was, down to, the big man knows where to take the truck. I also wonder, however, if there's bits of the Eastern District where you have to have local knowledge to know where to pick up the waste. See, they're all nodding. And if you're going to reduce the number of collections and improve the performance, then you really have got to know where the rubbish is and where you need to put people to pick it up. And as you know, it's an issue about timing and scheduling as well. I'm also very concerned about the shared bins, that we know exactly where those are and that arrangements are made properly for that, because some of those are a nightmare. I'm thinking around parts of the Bouverie estate at the back of Wellingborough Road, and in particular some of those are commercial waste areas, commercial waste bins. And you can also look at some of the HIMOs where they say they're having commercial collections, they're not relying on the council, and there's an interplay there. But whether it's a private collection or it's a HIMO or whatever it is, it's a rubbish knocking around the area. It pulls it down, and it's the number one complaint that the public have. In the case of Bury and some of the other places that have done this successfully 10 years ago, I'd be really interested to know how long it took them and what the process was, because I think Councillor Holland-Delamere pointed out to the length of time it's taken to sort out some of the differences between the different types of waste collection in parts of Northampton and parts certainly of my patch. They're still resolving it. People are still having arguments or having requests about what kind of bins they have, and somebody actually got charged for a green waste bin, and she got everything set up to do it, and then she was told, oh no, they're not doing green waste bins on her side of the street, and the whole thing had to be undone. I mean, there are really serious issues currently about the integration of the services that need to be resolved. The other thing which this issue about the statement the officer made about if it's in house, then you can deal with issues that arise. In other words, you can be more flexible. Well, you know, I just really flag up some cautions about that, because, you know, when I had to deal with these issues previously, we went the other way. We went from in-house to out-of-house on quite a few services. And one of the advantages of that, I mean, there's all kinds of political arguments you can have one way or the other if you want. In
purely pragmatic terms, actually knowing where you're doing things and having a schedule and a time scale for things is absolutely key. So, and whether that's in-house or out of house, that's still the same thing, because you still have the same resources, you have the same budget, and you have the same number of people, and you have the same amount of rubbish to pick up from the same number of houses. And you can't just divert people off to do something else. And you can't, the amount of wriggle room is really very limited indeed. So I would really urge caution about that area, because having seen it go one way or the other, you know, in-house services, out-of-house services, some of the issues and challenges are actually quite the same, and some of the requirements are the same. So I mean, I can understand some of the pressures to get the recycling improved, but I think with this proposal, I think you're starting from the wrong place, and I think it needs to go back. This is why I supported the call-in, although I didn't sign it because it had already gone in. But I think it needs to go back, and it needs to have a much more careful look at what's actually happening, because I don't think this will work. And I know, I mean, the people in my ward, if things get any worse, my inbox will be even fuller of complaints about rubbish. And I think it is such a sensitive service, and I know in the Eastern District where I live, if there's a mistake in this service, it's seen immediately in terms of more rubbish lying around the street, more smells. I don't know if there's vermin there, I never look, but it is really problematic and very unhygienic. And so I don't actually think that this is the right decision to take in this form. And I'm sorry if that's a bit long, but that's what I think.
Thank you. Scott?
Thank you, Chair. I welcome Fiona's, let's call it, concession around possible extra resources for communal bins. I know it's recognised as been a big sticking point in my ward, so thank you for that. I do have to say I'm a bit disappointed with some of the selective amnesia that's on show tonight from some of the people out here. So I'll just go through some of the earliest dates I could find around this. December 2022 was the first date I could find that mentions this. Yes, December 2022. There's a working group set up in 2023. We also have a member here tonight who was part of this committee, which has been reported to numerous times about this. So I'm not sure why everyone seems to be so dead against something that they recommended to Cabinet to be signed off in November 2023. I would like some answers on that if possible, because I think we all deserve to know what was said, what wasn't said, what's gone on record, because I actually can't find anyone speaking up against this, and they recommended it to be signed off in the first place, and now they've called in their own recommendations. So thank you, Chair.
Jonathan?
Yeah, I'm not sure who's referring to. I think they're only myself and yourself on that committee. Chair, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
So I think you're jumping.
Rod was there. Is it? Sorry, I thought you were mixing up there the
You're talking about this committee
and this resources strategy. Oh, previous. Okay, I don't know.
I'm not sure. The point I want to make is a few points really. It's really important. I'm sorry I have to do this to remind the administration that a call-in is a valid process of scrutiny, boys. So please can we perhaps occasionally just put our testosterone away a little bit, put it in the bottom drawer, and let scrutiny do the job of scrutinising. That's really important. So you do well to engage, listen more. You have a majority. You can make whatever decision you want. And I'll come back to that point in a moment, because that's really important and significant in the context of this decision. In principle, I'm actually supportive of this decision. I agree with Councillor Holland-Ahmed that there are some really significant issues around communications that I think we haven't quite got to grips with. The point that's been made that was politicised, I'm afraid, about representation is actually a valid point. And I think it's important that we have that discussion, maybe not now in this decision, but in wider context. If we have working groups, everybody should engage in those working groups. That is part of the process of developing appropriate outcomes so that we do not find ourselves in this situation. So I think that's a significant point to raise. You don't need to politicise it. The evidence was there. It was very clear for everyone to see. Now, I've got plenty more that I want to say, but at this point, I'd like to know what reform councillors think, because there are plenty of reform councillors here who represent urban communities, so I'd like to hear what they've got to say before I add anything else. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for... Oh.
Sorry.
Okay. Right. Dave.
Thank you, Chair. A lot of people talked about this decision being made, and this was made a long time ago, and what it was all about, and what the reasoning behind all of this. And it was to ensure that there's sustainability. This is from the last strategy from 2023, and the approach to dealing with waste and what to minimise waste we could produce while maximising the waste we recycle. And that's what a lot of this is about. And it said it was going to be brought in within the forthcoming years. Those forthcoming years are now. Now, excuse the pun, but kicking the can down the road by further and going on and asking for this, asking for that, we're here to surely produce something. It's going to come in. So it's a question of, has it been done in a way that it's going to come in? Are we happy with the way it's come in? I know there's a lot of negatives there, but there's also a lot of negatives that's been pushed out on public social media as well. There's not all the right information has gone on there. You look at certain posts and people are misinformed. And people are making noises about being not informed correctly. So that's half of your battle there. And I think there is also mistakes our side that maybe we haven't produced or returned back and said these are the proper reasons why we're doing it. That hasn't been publicly made as much as the people who are against it. Fly tipping. How much household waste fly tipping is there at the moment? There's not that much. The wards that Caroline and myself look after, we go around at the weekends, we report a lot of it. The great big thanks go to the Wombles, they pick a lot of it up, they report a lot of it, and it's all small, minimal stuff. It's bulk items, it's stuff that's picked up, kept on the side of the road, cans, things like that. It's not black bags dumped everywhere. Not where we are. And we're talking St David's. There are occasionally black bags, 1 or 2 black bags. If we go around on Sunday, you may see 1 black bag propped up outside a flat. That's missed a collection date. And that'll get reported, and lo and behold, it gets picked up. I can even quote the chairman, Mike O'Connor, who the parish council has said that he's quoted in saying that St David's has never looked so clean. Again, I must credit the Wombles for a lot of that. Caroline and myself reporting it, and the Kingsthorpe Parish Council going around doing their job as well. So, fly tip is going to fly tip. It's been recognised that black bin bag houses, terraces, they're going to be carrying on with one bag. I appreciate what you're saying with Keith as well, and people are going to dump over on the other side of the road. I can't argue about that. I'm sure they do that. There's something like that. But there's not going to be any extra increase of fly tipping on that from a black bin bag. And with regards to food waste, there is a risk of contaminated food, and you can't wash cardboard boxes. You can wash your tins of dog foods and crush them down and things like that. But again, they're either in a black bag and shoved inside a black bin, plastic bin. But so it's going to happen. How long do you want to kick the can down the road for? And that's my side of it. You say you're not used to hearing us speak. Okay. Fortunately, I may not speak so eloquently as some of the others, but that's the word of the street.
Thank you. All right. Anybody else from the committee wish to say anything at this stage? Ron?
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to again thank the officers for all the work they've done in doing this. I'd also like to thank the cross-party membership that did look into this, and also thank the councillors and ex-councillors for your input. I think we need to be careful about the narrative around consultation. The approach builds on work that was consulted on and approved between 2015 and 2017, and it has been revisited through the 2023 consultation and cross-party members' engagement. So it isn't accurate to suggest that there's been no consultation it's part of a longer evidence-based process. That brings me on to this. It appears that by the time of the 2023 consultation, key elements of the service, including HWRC operations and access arrangements, had already been shaped by earlier contractual decisions taken prior to this administration. That raises the fundamental question about how meaningful that consultation was. With saying that, we on the cross-party group, we looked at, and it was very well explained to us that and by the way, Councillor Keeble and Councillor Keith, I really take those points on that you made. But it was taken on to us as well that we could move a lot faster and react a lot faster to situations if this recommendation goes forward. And also, it was also explained to us that it reduces the carbon footprint as well. With the, while I think Councillor Lister said the 2027, that was so residents could experience a seamless transition rather than coming to 2028 and falling off a cliff edge. They were there. So that was that. Anyway, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. All right, so there's a few bits and pieces in my own head that I want to try to get straight from the people from the call-in. So this DAN waste resources strategy that was put through by the Cabinet, of which you were a member, clearly signalled a move towards 3-week collection. It doesn't? No.
No, Chair,
so on page 9, where it says waste prevention, the bullet point that says we will do it by restricting residual waste capacity by providing smaller bins or collecting residual bins less frequently is not a nod towards harmonising towards 3 weeks, because that's what's in the strategy.
The strategy says appropriate harmonised waste collection. It is very clear what it says in that strategy.
But it also says
it says appropriate harmonised waste collection as its #1 priority. It doesn't say restrict the waste as its #1 priority. It says appropriate harmonised waste collection.
Correct.
And if any changes are made of a significant nature, that it will be consulted on and the residents will be listened to.
But it also
not told it would be disingenuous to listen to and that we will ignore what they're saying.
I accept that's a different point, but it also does say a clear nod towards collecting residual bins less frequently, and I'm reading from page 9.
But it doesn't say we'll go to 3 weekly collection. It says appropriate harmonised collection. There is different words, what that means.
But these words are in here too, so much as you might complain about selective misquoting, you know, we can't be selectively misquoting. So, you know, I'm struggling to see where this is not actually a continuation of the strategy that's adopted by the council just being implemented. But I'm pleased to get that clarification. Now the other bit about the this won't work and comparing areas, I think we need to be very careful about what I would refer to as the tyranny of the average, because what we really need to try, where possible, is to look at those very low-level super output areas and compare those, because within this district we have, I think ONS have about 33,000 odd of those super output areas, which are only a few hundred houses and a couple of 3,000 populations, but they do provide a much better comparison. So we have areas, so 1 is the most deprived, 33,000 is the least deprived. We have areas right across that continuum, right across that scale. So in Castle, I think it's about 200 odd that score 250. In Southbrook, it's about 2,000 or 3,000, and in parts of South Northants, it's 32,500. I think parts of my own ward. So, but what we have to be careful about is that tyranny of the average. So if Elon Musk was to walk into a full Wembley Stadium, on average, everybody is a multi-millionaire. so that's what we have to be very careful about. But it makes the point about, you know, the average would would be tilted. So Daventry have been running this, and we don't, in my view, need to look too far beyond their own district. We've got this, as I said, cabinet. We have this laboratory of the way it's been done, outsourced here in the town, in-house in South Northants, and a hybrid sort of solution in Daventry. So when Daventry moved it to 3 weeks, particularly comparing Southbrook to the rest of it, to the leafier areas, did that experience any increases in fly tipping, infestation, smells, odours, whatever, relative to everybody else? That's what I want. And we have that data. So is that available, Fiona, that we can try and do it? Because I think we can compare Southbrook to some of the tougher parts of Northampton quite comparably. And the other bits, Castle and whatever, they've got the highest density of the weekly black bin bags. They can be, I think, legitimately excluded for that comparison. So that's my question. Are we, we have that data, we know it from ourselves, and that's why I'm looking for evidence that says, actually, what you're saying isn't right. 2008, well, I think it was, well, and I do know that the recycling rate did go out through the roof whenever they introduced it. It went from something to, they were well north of 50% at one point, this Daventry district. They did go from like mid-table to top of that national waste recycling as Daventry district within a year of that being introduced. So, and that's, that's a fact. Yeah.
Just to add to that point, I think for me that's the bit I wanted to come back on. We have got this example of Daventry, and I know we can hear all the dialogue about comparisons and differences and so on, but it is the closest to us in terms of our experiences. Yes. So what I'm interested to know is exactly that point. What was the impact on recycling when these changes were made? What happened with regards to landfill waste? Did that shrink? And I don't know whether we have that data or whether we don't. If we don't, we should have that data.
Yeah, we should.
It's the example of that will give us, I think, some assurances that this thing actually made a difference. The other bit of the information that I've not heard specifically is that number about if we were to switch back to 2 weeks for Daventry, what would that cost look like? We talked about cost, but I don't know what that cost is.
It's in the report. I think it was around £1 million.
Okay, so £500,000 to do that. The bit that's missing for me also from the broader point of view is the big why. Because we've talked quite a lot about cost tonight, and again, I haven't said it already, Fiona, but I appreciate the data and the information you've put together in that presentation as well. But it's got a very cost effectiveness vibe. I think for me it misses the bigger why, and Councillor Kilbride said earlier on, gosh, it's hot, it's getting hotter, isn't it? Yeah, well, there's a reason it's getting hotter, because we chuck a load of food into our landfill, food waste, which turns into methane, which warms the atmosphere. It's a fact, sadly, it's a scientific fact. So there's a mission there, there's a purpose there for some people would be sufficient, in my view, for them to be encouraged maybe to do something about it. And I think if I can cast my mind back as a Daventry resident of many years, that was one of the arguments and one of the stories told as to the reason why we should be doing this sort of stuff. So I think there's something about purpose that is missing. People aren't going to be interested in whether it saves us $1 or $2, to be blunt. They will be concerned about what it's going to do to the environment, what it's going to do to their local environment as well. They're all of those things that are really important. And we've got surely opportunities for case stories, examples, people who've experienced a transition, not in Wigan or Bury, but in Daventry, potentially. Yes. So the comms bit for me is the entire element that's missing. And you made the point earlier on that there has been some, I think, information that's not been correct. And I don't think that's been put out there deliberately by anybody. I think there's just been misinterpretation. At Cabinet, I wasn't clear on whether it was 2 weekly or 1 weekly for black sacks. It's every week for black sacks. If you have a black sack, it's the same. In terms of the houses and the streets, my understanding is it's somewhere around 450 streets that will still remain on that system. So I think we have to get to the facts and we have to portray the facts, because otherwise we are going to end up making a poor decision. for me, I just think it seems logically the right thing to do. Change is never easy, and there will be people that will find it difficult. We must work really hard at making sure those people with difficulties and requirements for extra resources get those extra resources. We have to make that as simple as possible, not online forms jumping through hoops here, there and everywhere, because that again will just not, that won't work. So simplicity is missing for me.
Yeah. On the cost point, I was quite surprised when the working group got it that there was no overwhelming financial case against outsourcing or insourcing. It was more or less flick a coin. It was within a few $100,000 over the 10-year or whatever we looked at, which I was really surprised at. I fully expected to have thought, well, the outsourcing cost will be a lot cheaper. So it then came down to the qualitative assessments. Well, there were a lot of assessments around the new legislation and whatever, but so this is not really a financial decision, because I think the council is going to have to pay its 20 million a year. There is, on the face of it, a saving for moving to 3 weekly, which does make some sense in terms of fewer collections, fewer rounds, etc., along with harmonisation and whatever. And I'm pleased that we got that 2027 answer, because I was wondering why not do it together. But if there's another, again, driven from central government legislation coming at us, then we're going to have to respond to that as well, which is always one of the many things that we're... Sorry, was there something on the screen we need to...
Sorry, I was looking for the Daventry data for you.
Oh, that's okay.
And please do it a slide. That's not the one. That's not the one.
That's not the one, okay. Right, sorry, Sally, you wanted to come back.
I mean, one of the bits that's really missing for me in this is a timetable of how it's going to be implemented, because you've got one thing that's coming in next year, and then the insourcing, which is coming in the year after that. And I understand that the costs look kind of similar now, and that is partly because of, a lot of outsourcing used to be driven by the lower prices were driven by cheaper wages, lower wages, and obviously there's a lot of equalisation in the wages now, so that's dealt with quite a lot of that. But I haven't seen in this the timetable for how you're going to deal with the legacy issues, like Councillor Holland-Delamere spoke about, that you've got a mishmash in some areas, including mine, including his, of different things, which are a source of constant friction and irritation, and, because there have been discussions about what happens in Dallington Spencer. So that has to be dealt with. Then people have to know if they're going to be affected. Some people might well want to be moving from black bags to bins because, for all kinds of reasons. And there's no rollout there. And then depending on that, you'll then be into the insourcing. And so it'll be sort of a couple of years of change. And we haven't seen a timetable for that. And I would stress it, and I know you've heard often enough, Councillor Stansfield, that this is the most sensitive area of service, particularly in some of the high-density areas. There really is a need for improvement, particularly in central Northampton. I think particularly in the business district, because that is a real problem. And if you go up to some of the cities up north, I mean, I've seen them do deep cleanses, like, very, very regularly to improve the cleaning of their area, and much more frequent refuse collection. There is, I hate to say, but there is a lack of confidence in the service. I'm not bothered about what happened previously, and because I'm not looking at the history. I'm looking at how we get from where we are to where we need to be. There is a lack of confidence in the ability to improve the service, because some people have asked for it to be improved and it's not been improved, that needs to be absolutely spelt out before we go down this road, because otherwise it probably will work fine for some people, but otherwise if there's mistakes in this very sensitive service, there will be immediate problems and an immediate public backlash. So we do need a really, really detailed timetable, and I think that the Cabinet should have had that before it agreed the decision.
Sorry, Dave?
Yeah, to follow up on what Sally's saying there, I think a lot of it is education as well. We need to get more education out going forward with this.
Comms.
You know, because what needs to be, you know, because people will just carry on as if they were until we tell them recycle more. The more you recycle, the less your black bins are going to get full. And that's ultimately what the waste strategy turns around.
Well,
some people need it.
Again, and I know Fiona will probably not, because the time and again at the working group I kept saying this is a comms project. It is not a logistics exercise in emptying bins, because there'll be bins on the side of the road. Sorry, the logistics, the bin lorry will turn up. Whether there's going to be a bin at the side of the road is the comms that we have to make sure we get right. So it is overwhelmingly a comms exercise. Sorry, yes, Jonathan.
Just to add something to that, I mean, obviously the simpler recycling agenda also sits in the background of this. That's the reality in terms of the trajectory that we're taking. I saw an interesting survey from which was specifically talking about food waste. And I think food waste is a problem for a lot of people, and this is borne out by the results in this survey, which talked to 52% of respondents who said, yes, my council do food waste on a weekly basis. But 23% of that group said they rarely used it. So that's the issue. And when probed why, 21% said they use a home compost bin. Great, lovely. Others said because it's too smelly, too unhygienic, or too messy, which was quite a substantive percentage. So I think the food waste is the issue that is going to cause the pest problem, if there is going to be a pest problem. That, again, would be great to have. What is that evidence, Chair? You mentioned it earlier. What's the evidence of the switch within Daventry, particularly in those high-density areas? Did we see it? Did we notice it? Did we experience it? I suspect we probably don't have that information, because it probably didn't get carried over, maybe from Daventry.
Well, certainly
district.
recycling went gangbusters very quickly. I remember Joe Guildford, who was the portfolio holder at the time, was very pleased that it really went very quickly, because South Northants' recycling rate was one of the best, and I think it got close to, if not overtaking, what South Northants did. It had a massive changing effect on getting stuff out of the bins and into the blue. That undoubtedly did have an effect.
And just to be clear, though, I'm not denying there is a problem, because there is, and there are challenges and there are issues. Exactly. I'm not denying that at all. But I think for me, I'm not sure that doing anything around this or switching back to 2 weeks is the solution to that problem. Okay. That's the point.
Well, again, I come back to the strategy. If 2 weeks was such an issue, why did this strategy not state we'll harmonise the 2 weeks? You know, and also, why have you lived with it for 5 years, particularly members like yourself down from Daventry area? Like, why not change it on day one if it was so bad?
Change what? Sorry.
The 3 weekly Daventry area.
I'm not saying it doesn't necessarily work in Daventry. What I'm saying is I'm not saying it doesn't work in Daventry. What I'm saying, clearly again, is appropriate harmonised waste collections across the area. What we don't know is this appropriate harmonised waste collections? We've not consulted, we've not gone out, we've taken elements from a consultation that completely say that's not what residents want, and use that to argue that's what we should be doing. And then we say we shouldn't go out and ask residents because we've already made the decision and we don't like the answer we're going to get back, and it's not worth it. We will create false hope. For an administration that says they are so hell-bent on asking residents, and we're really listening, we're really interested in what people have got to say, for officers to stand up representing the administration to say that they're not going to do it because they don't like the answer isn't good enough. And that's not acceptable, and this committee shouldn't take that as acceptable either.
Okay. It's a slightly different point. Right, I'm just conscious of the fact, I'm just conscious of the fact we've been at this coming up on 2 hours. Are we in a position that we want to move to vote, or we just want to take a 5-minute comfort break? Yeah, maybe we can do that. Just have a quick
point I'd like to make.
Can I just say, I really would like some answers to like some of the questions about the timescales, and it might be the officers or it might be the portfolio holder who is supposed to be one of the people.
I was going to invite him in to speak. Yeah, I was going to invite him in to speak. So shall we just reconvene in 10 minutes? Yeah, quickly.
So Dan used the word harmonisation. That is at the core of the flaw of this, in my view, because we're not harmonising. We're still maintaining and having different services for different groups of people. We're not harmonising it. The harmonisation really is about the one contract. That's the reality. It's not about the services. So we shouldn't be using harmonisation, because I have people in my ward, Daventry, Brixworth, who are saying, great, we're going to go back to 2 weekly. We're confusing people as well. So we've got to get rid of the word harmonisation.
Well, it is Dan's point that he keeps labouring about appropriate harmonisation, and if weekly works in those terrace streets, that's what we're going to have. So anyway, shall we just have a... Okay, can we have a quick... well, was it 10 past? So shall we reconvene at 20 past? Yeah? I know a couple of people have indicated. All right, can we reconvene, please? So, oh, there's Debbie, right. Who was there? Oh, Jonathan. No. Oh, it was empty. Oh, okay. Right. Sorry. So Jonathan's back. Everybody's back. Okay. So thank you for that. So, Nigel, we've heard a lot. Can we answer some of these points?
I'm going to answer some of the questions. I'm not going to answer all of them because obviously a lot have been covered with the slides. I'll answer a few questions. I'll make a few points. And then obviously the Deputy Director of Waste will just finish off. And then if we've missed anything, I'm sure Stuart will remind us of anything we've missed at the end before you vote. Thank you for coming, though. Thank you for everyone's attendance. Thank you for everyone's questions. We are listening. We do listen, whatever you think. So let's start with Councillor Lister. Well, I think it's a bit of a hypocrisy, really. You know, you brought in, you're saying about your not free weekly. Yeah, you brought it in as a Conservative administration. It got brought in by Conservative administration in Daventry. It's obviously worked. It's been successful. My email box is not full of, for the last year, has not been full of complaints from Daventry residents about free weekly. In fact, I've received none, and I've received none from any of the Conservative people living in that area or any other members living in that area. So I don't really understand why you don't think free weekly will work, won't work when it does there. Thought about harmonisation. Harmonisation for me is about that. Say a tax, we all pay the council tax, yeah? For me, somebody living in a property, a detached property in Daventry, Tolster, Northampton, wherever, yeah, or somebody living in a terrace property, or somebody lives in a flat, wherever they live in West Northamptonshire, whatever their property banding is and whatever type of property it is, they should get the same service. And that, for me, that is harmonisation. Yeah? And doing this is going to free weekly, this is what that's about. Yeah? It's only fair that residents in Daventry get the same service of people in Tolster than anywhere else. For me, pardon? They will, because
just let them finish.
They will, because like we know, all terrace properties and all flats will stay on weekly things. So that's wherever you live. So terrace property in Daventry and a terrace property.
No.
Pardon?
No. Sorry, Fiona. Just let Nigel finish. No, carry on.
It is the same, because what I'm saying to you, if the property type, in Daventry and the property type in Northampton, they should get the same service, and that's what they'll get when free weekly comes in. Yeah, they will. Whether it's a terrace property, a flat, or whether it's detached property or any other type of property. Yeah. Obviously, I've already spoke about you brought in a waste strategy paper, and we are now fulfilling that. You know, we are bringing that to fruition, and you know, you might not like the over 3,500 responses you got. You signed Belittleham to 1,000 something, but you didn't need to fill the whole consultation in to submit it. So yeah, suddenly now you don't like that consultation, and you don't really think it's a good idea. Cross-party, I've already spoke about that. I don't need to go back to that. Obviously, I do believe that if you've been invited to a task and finish group on such an important subject, that it would be very good that people attend. And I do really thank the people who did attend week in, week, month in, month out. Unfortunately, some people didn't bother, and now they're obviously speaking loudly tonight. Fly tipping. Well, what can we say? Yeah, you know my views on fly tipping. You think you're going to improve? You're going to increase fly tipping it'll increase fly tipping in Northampton. Obviously, you've highlighted that this is the worst area for fly tipping. Totally agree, yeah. But why did that start? Well, let's have a think about it, because I think you, as administration, I think you should hang your heads in shame that the way you take no consideration about fly tipping whatsoever. You allowed that broken window syndrome to just go across Northamptonshire, and now we've been fully made aware that, unfortunately, 2-3 years ago, I won't give us exact dates, that the Cabinet decided to stop giving out fixed penalty notices as a mandatory, not the normal procedure to deal with people who fly tip. So enforcement. Now, every other council in the country do that, and it's proved very successful. And they are actually, the only way we're going to deal with some of these people, unfortunately, is enforcement. And unfortunately, you decided not to clear up the fly tipping. Then you decided not to stop enforcement. Oh, and by the way, you then decided to not clear up any graffiti as well. So that's why I'm sat here today. So
yeah,
you can't even talk about that. Yeah, that's fine about that.
Bins, please.
Yeah, it's fine. James, Mr. Hill, thank you. Obviously, vermin. I'm not sure how what vats are really interested in eating, but I'm sure they're not interested in eating in nappies and sanitary ware and dog mess. I think they're more interested in eating food. And obviously, if you use your food caddy, then it won't be an issue. People need to start using their food bins. Okay. The density, well, we've just knocked that out of the window, haven't we, really? We've told everything about it, but then obviously Councillor Pinder starts going on about Cambridge. A bit strange, really. I'm not sure where she's... Well, I'm not really sure, really, how we can talk about Pinder, how we can talk about Cambridge and always Hunton Place, all these other places. That's suddenly... you bring...
Sorry, please, let them finish.
You come to... Your thing is about... It's not urban, and the next minute we're talking about Cambridge and Huntingdon and places like that. I'm really not sure where you were going with that one. Councillor Kilbride, can we just say also that you're saying, 6% whoopee-doo, that's not whatever. Well, actually 6% is 4,500 tonnes of rubbish, of residual waste. Now, if we can take that recycling out of the residual waste and go into the recycle stream, that's a massive effect. Yeah, financially, yes, financially, but also for everyone's the environment. Yeah. So, and also, I just want to make you aware, ID Verdi don't empty bins. So I'm not really sure where you've got that from either. So, Keith, you speak sense. You're one of the people in this room who do speak sense. I really, and you fly tipping.
Well, stop. No.
No, I won't.
Please hang on.
You.
Just sorry.
No, excuse
Nigel,
me.
just wait. Fiona.
I'm really sorry. I just hold this up, okay? And I'm really sorry, but I'm sorry, but as a cabinet member, what I expect from somebody is to listen, to respond, not just be dismissive and insulting.
I'm not insulting. I'm giving you some facts.
I'll just let her finish.
You don't like the facts, unfortunately.
I think you let her finish the point.
Yeah.
Not
Sorry.
be just dismissive and insulting and disrespectful of people who have come here tonight to have a say on it. I don't care less what colour people are in terms of whether they're their own colour or political colour. But people have come here tonight to say something, to have a valid opinion, and I believe that needs to be responded to respectfully. And I'm sorry, but you are responding to it in the way that I take it, and the reaction that you just got from people
when you...
Just please, may I finish? Just every now and then saying, oh, you talk sense, is unbelievably insulting to a group of incredibly intelligent people who have come here tonight to speak.
Right, okay.
So I'm please asking you to potentially just change your tone,
okay.
change your approach and be a little bit more respectful and less dismissive and insulting for people who have come here to speak. Thank you.
Yeah, and I agree with that, by the way, Nigel.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. I'm sorry about that. But what I do say is that he's come with the facts. He hasn't come with spurious, things about different. He's come with actual knowledge, and we do recognise that there's certain issues in Keith's areas, in Scott Packer's areas. We all know there's certain areas. So, yeah, and obviously, it's like like if you use your food caddy, you're not going to get the mess. This is all about pushing the public and the residents into recycling more. Unfortunately, we have certain areas of Northampton where residents don't want to recycle. I get constant images of black bin bags, black bags full of plastic and waste, what could go into recycling. Sometimes you have to we have to make change so then we get increased recycling. We all want to increase recycling. It's better for everybody, better for the planet, better for everybody. Yeah, and if we don't make change, I think some areas of Northampton, some residents will not. They'll just carry on putting all their waste into black bags because they think as soon as they put it outside their door, it's not their problem. It's nothing to do with them anymore. Yeah. So I think it is education. It's about a very big comms campaign. It's about educating certain people, certain areas where I don't think it has got through about recycling and how to recycle. Yeah, and I think also there is that. Unfortunately, we are now trying to obviously change how we enforce fly tipping because it is a massive issue, and it's just. It is the right thing to do. Look at all the different areas who are going to free weekly. Yeah. And that's it from me, really. Obviously, Councillor Keeble, yeah, I totally acknowledge certain areas we've got issues, yeah. And I've just told you about, saying about Baring Street, I went this way last week. And, but obviously a lot of your areas are on black bags who won't be affected. And but unfortunately, as you're fully aware, where we have got a lot of the fly tipping issues, them residents are on black bags and they will not be affected by free weekly. So it's the other areas we have to deal with.
Right. So, have you anything on the questions that were raised about costs, questions that were raised about phasing, questions that were raised about the implementation plan? What can we satisfy the committee about that? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So the question was asked about the exact objective. It's a series of complementary objectives rather than ones that are in conflict with each other. So fairness, we've talked about, efficiency of operations, increased recycling, implementing the strategy, and overall the best possible service, but recognising it has to be an affordable cost. Again, questions and concerns have been raised at fly tipping. I would argue that Veolia are actually collecting the fly tipping very efficiently. There have been changed operations since August. It's unfortunate that as fast as they collect it, the fly tipping returns. Number of properties on SAT collection, it's around 20,000 properties. And it is just worth pointing out that other authorities who have implemented 3 weekly collections haven't made the concessions to SAT collection properties or to communal bins. And actually by tailoring the collection, that's what we were asked to do when the waste strategy was in development. It was trying to make sure that we had equivalent services for households and equivalent housing types, as the Cabinet member has said. I would like to make sure it's clear, because Councillor Keeble, you mentioned about redundancies. We need the current staff who are employed by Veolia and Norse to deliver the service. And what I don't want them to do is be concerned about their roles. What we need to do, however, is capture the information from staff so that we have a specification that is clear and measurable across the whole of West Northants. There was also mention of garden waste collection services, and if you don't have a wheeled bin, you can't have the collection. That's not true. There are SAT collections available for properties who don't have wheeled bins, so you are able to pay for a garden waste collection. Oh, okay. Musical accompaniment. In terms of data from Daventry, sorry, we've had a few technical issues, but I can confirm there was no displacement of waste to HWRCs. As I showed you earlier, Daventry's fly tipping did reduce, recycling and food waste participation as well as tonnage did go up, and residual waste did go down, all of which have that cost benefit that we've talked about. In terms of a timetable, we have split the 2 key recommendations into 2 work streams, 3 weekly and in delivering the service in-house, obviously on different timescales. So 3 weekly we have said we will implement by spring 2027, which, as I said earlier, coincides with the simpler recycling timescales. And in-house will be delivered by the end of the contracts with Norse and Veolia by June 2028. I am sorry that there's a lack of confidence in our ability to improve the service. What I would say is the waste team do have a good track record of delivering change. We have recently just procured 2 key contracts that started in April this year. There's been reference to the booking system. So we have got a really good team of experienced officers working on this, and we are currently working up the detailed programme, which I would be happy to share.
Okay, we're going to have to compete with the barn now.
Anything from...
Sorry, Sally.
Yeah, I think that's really helpful to have more clarity about the timetable. I think that it would be very helpful if that could be shared, so that people can see, and so that the councillors, at least we've got the information, we can share it around, and then presumably the council will be sharing it around with the public. I have to say, I think to put in a change like that by next spring is going to be a really big issue, and I imagine that if you must have a very good idea about when it's happening, given the sort of timescales. I would just say, just to pick up a point that Councillor Baker made as well about the format of these meeting.
Wrong, Fiona.
Because just sorry. Sorry.
I knew you meant.
Sorry. Boing. But the point of these meetings is to really scrutinise and get under the skin of some of these decisions, and sometimes that can involve some tough questioning. And I think that it's not what we want is information out of yourselves, and I think it's really not helpful, and it's obviously caused quite some agitation that it actually becomes a political to and fro, which actually this is about what is going to work best, and it's about the detail of what happens when, and some of us are always going to agree. I mean, I'm always going to, I hear a lot of the information that's been really helpful. I still have huge reservations because I don't think that 3 weekly is going to work. But, I think it's really important that if we have future hearings like this, that people are very clear that we're here to get information out of the officers and out of the portfolio holders. We're not here just to have a political knock-around.
I agree. I think we got under the skin. Whether we got under the skin of the issue is a different matter. Sorry, Scott, and then I want to begin to wrap this up, and then Jonathan.
Yeah, I would just like to say that this has been going on for about 4 years now. There have been multiple occasions for members to turn up. Obviously, we haven't had that much of an opportunity over the last 4 years to turn up to the scrutiny committees, but it has been going on. The officers have been working on it. It has gone to committees. It has gone to Cabinet previously. The opportunities have been there. It's just now that people have started making noise about it, which is fair enough. You are entitled to do that, but it has been going on. I don't know where this sense of it's just magically turned up in the last few months has come from. About 4 years.
I don't think anybody's saying it hasn't actually turned up.
Sorry, I think what you're saying is there's been a direction to travel.
Yes.
Yes. Right. Okay. Yes. Fine. Sorry, Jonathan.
Yeah, just a few points. Councillor Stansfield, please, when you say you're listening, please listen, because you clearly hadn't listened to the point that had been made earlier on. This is an important session. There are important meetings to scrutinise, and you really do need to listen and respect other people's opinions. It's politics. People have got different opinions. They've got different views. Doesn't mean you're right and they're wrong. It just means they're different. That's our job, is to work through and find out what actually the correct decision is. I'm very concerned still about this issue of fairness and talking about same houses will get the same service. I've got terraced houses in Brixworth. They don't get a black sack every week. They have the Daventry system. They have the 123 plus system. So please be very careful when we're talking about house styles and services and fairness and all the rest of it. I'm pretty sure that's true across the rest of Daventry where there are terraced houses. We need to be very careful about this harmonisation and fairness piece because it's misleading people, that's for sure. I do have one recommendation I'd like to make, Chair, and that is for future task and finish groups. Frankly, I don't think Cabinet members should be included in it. It should be a members group. It should not include Cabinet members. I think that would allow all people from all persuasions and all parties to feel free to be able to speak. If they want to invite them along to come and provide info to that session, I think that's fine. You made one point that I really do need to get to the bottom of. You've suggested that the previous administration said in a cabinet meeting we're not going to do FPNs. I'd like to see evidence for that, if that's the case, because that's quite a big thing to throw out in a scrutiny meeting like this. So if that is correct, then show us the evidence for it, please. I think that's very important. And your point, Councillor Parker, about you haven't had the opportunity. You have. Scrutiny of public meetings. You have had the opportunity.
Just let them finish. Let them finish.
Yes, but members of the public are allowed to come to scrutiny committee meetings in any capacity as a member of the public. So you had that opportunity.
Sorry. Jonathan. Thank you. Okay, so, sorry, Dan. Yeah, I was going to say, are you in a position that you want to make a recommendation here to wrap this up?
Yes, Chair, and if I've listened carefully, and I just want to go back to that consultation point, because to say that it'd be disingenuous again, because it would hold out hope for our residents. I mean, this administration is admitting again that this is a closed-door decision. So we have to look at what the decision is that we're passing back here, because they have already made that decision and they've said it quite clearly this evening. They've got no intention of listening to our residents. If they had the evidence to justify whether this would be a sensible decision, they wouldn't be afraid to test it and in front of the public. Can we name a single other council where they've decided to stop asking residents what they think simply because you decided in advance what their opinion was and whether it mattered? But your favourite defence today is, well, we're doing this because we signed off a strategy. Well, my administration signed off a strategy, and I want to be really clear about what we signed off. We signed off a 15-year visionary framework, not a blank cheque for service cuts. We deliberately built safeguards into that document to prevent exactly this kind of rushed imposition. When that strategy was adopted, it explicitly mandated that if significant changes to services are proposed, these will be subject to a separate business case, consultation and cabinet decision. Moving to a 3-weekly model is objectively a significant change. By bypassing the opportunity to consult, you are weaponising the strategy's principles to bypass the very democratic protections built into the exact same document. Furthermore, the strategy demands that we provide appropriate harmonised waste services and requires that services be tailored where appropriate so that services are suitable for different housing types. Now, I do acknowledge that we're talking about bag collections in Northampton. You have laboured that several times. But as Councillor Harris has said, there are many different housing types across West Northamptonshire, and the strategy was very clear about harmonising for different housing types, not a race to the bottom for 3 weekly collections. And do not try to claim you're doing this because you're retaining sack collections. Keeping bags where a wheel bin physically cannot fit isn't a strategic tailoring, it's a basic geometry of housing. True harmonisation means assessing the capacity and risk for the thousands of high-density terrace housing in Northampton that can fit a bin but cannot sustain a 21-day wait without waste overflowing into the streets. Then you point to a handful of councils like Bury, Rochdale, Blackpool as the standards to make this look like a standard practice. Out of more than 300 local waste authorities in England, the vast majority continue to operate fortnightly or weekly residual collections. Only a small minority have taken the extreme step to moving to 3 weekly cycles. You're pointing to an outlier position and trying to pretend it is a national norm. But look at the reality of those places. Wigan is currently the site of a 25,000-tonne toxic waste disaster, costing taxpayers millions. Rochdale and Blackpool moved to these models under their own extreme financial duress and were forced to spend millions on aggressive alley gating and rapid response street cleaning teams just to stop the streets from becoming dumping grounds. Bury invested in massive new infrastructure. You are copying their frequency cut but ignoring the multi-million-pound clean-up costs it created. None of those authorities started from our baseline risk either, already the 10th highest in England for fly tipping, with Northampton accounting for 89% of it. Imposing this on Northampton without a single area-specific risk assessment is a reckless gamble. I must address the sheer political hypocrisy, though, of the Cabinet member. I find the position of this current administration impossible to reconcile with the national platform of the party they represent. Reform UK has campaigned nationally on the clear message that 3 weekly bin collections are not desirable and that reducing collection frequency
You can't complain about all this politicising this and doing the same.
I didn't complain.
Just keep it.
But anyway, that was the point. It was crackers. This was the national thing too. The policy fails the test of transparency, and it fails the test of evidence, and it fails the test of your own strategy. I asked this committee to refer it back to Cabinet, option C, which was to refer the original, I've just lost the place of my document, the original option C to refer the point back. I'll find it back again. Sorry?
No. Sorry, carrying on, Dan.
My apologies. It was option C. Musically. It's the excitement.
It's okay. If you can sing it, they can play it.
I've lost my...
Oh, they're on the march.
Yeah. Very good.
Okay. Wonder do they do requests?
I do.
Do you know My Old Man's a Dustman? That sounds appropriate. Right, are you ready, Dan? Have you got something?
I'll find it in a second. I've deleted the page and now it's going to be...
Oh, right, okay. So are you making a proposal that Cabinet refer back, that this gets referred back to Cabinet to consider what?
Whether harmonisation of waste collections is the appropriate method for West Northampton and South Northamptonshire to go back to a 3 weekly collection.
Okay. And do we have a seconder for that? Okay. So we have a proposal to refer this decision back to Cabinet to seek what further information? To seek...
and clarity on
Clarity on the collections for the clarity on the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve with the 3 weekly collection in terms of the risk assessments for Northampton and South Northamptonshire, evidence-based within this area, and also to further consult with our members of the public as to whether this is something we should do and whether we should, other ways we should look at harmonising our waste collections across West Northamptonshire, not a race to the bottom of 3 weekly. There are other options. Thank you.
Have you got all that, James? Sorry, quickly.
Can I just ask for clarification, please? Obviously, signatories can't vote, but can the signatory propose?
Well,
doesn't matter.
I'm happy enough to take a proposal as a member of the committee, but he won't be able to vote on his own proposal. But that's, yeah, it is a bit of a grey area. We had that discussion earlier, but I think it would be a little churlish to just rule it out of order. So I'm happy, as members of the committee, you can make a proposition, and it's been seconded by Sally. But I just, sorry, James.
Sorry, Chair.
So are we clear as to what it is that we're going to be asked to vote on? That we refer this back to Cabinet to seek further clarification, to get to do a consultation before any.
Whether this is the best.
Yeah, and okay. So can we have those in favour of that proposal, please? 1. And those against? 1, 2, 3, 4. Any abstentions? 2. So that's been defeated. So can we have a proposition and to take no further action? Proposed by Dave, seconded by Ron. Those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 1. So that...
Abstentions?
Any abstentions? 2.
And you and the Deputy Chair didn't.
I'm not voting, but don't need to. So, although I would be in favour of taking no further action, but nonetheless. So that has been approved, and that is the decision of the committee that we take no further action. So, the last item on the agenda is, I think, urgent business, of which there is none. And I'll close the meeting.